Back on Big Ten today, going through the conference schedules with Andy Katz, 3 more to unveil. Let's go to Maryland. Tough first year for Buzz Williams. Injury is a huge part of that, particularly with Pharrell Payne. They have Rutgers as a 2-play in addition to the aforementioned Indiana and Michigan State. Home slate includes Illinois, Nebraska, the LA schools. What do you make of the Terps heading into year 2 for Buzz, Andy?
Well, Buzz, historically, in all his different stops, has done really well in that year 2, year 3. He's got good recruiting, good transfers. I think there is some buzz about Buzz in College Park.
Palpable buzz, if you will. For Penn State, just 3 conference wins last year. They have made some significant roster moves. Also have Rutgers as a 2-play in addition to Nebraska and Ohio State. Get Michigan at home. Remember, they lost by just 2 to the eventual national champs there last year. Head to Illinois, Iowa, Michigan State. What do you make of Mike Rhodes and the Nittany Lions?
I mean, it's a really difficult schedule for a rebuilding team. I mean, right off on the right side of your screen there, those top 5 home venues are very difficult. And so, yeah, it's going to be hard for Penn State. We'll just see if the transfers have an impact because they're going to need to.
Yeah, Brent Byers, one of them, big part of that great Miami of Ohio team. We'll see whether or not he can pitch in a big way for Penn State. Finally, Rutgers, a team that played in the Crown this past season. 2 plays, Terps and Nittany Lions, as well as Purdue. Always a raucous atmosphere at Jersey Mike's. Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, UCLA, among those making the trip to Jersey.
Hey, Steve Peichel and their staff did a great job on retention. I mean, led by Tariq Francis. I mean, they've got a lot of talent returning. And with Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, all coming to Jersey Mike's, a.k.a. the Rack, I think this could be your sleeper team. I'm not back on the bus yet, but I think this could be a definite spoiler. And with the expanded field, they could be in play.
You're not on the bus, but you're checking the schedule just to see when it might swing by.
Yes.
There's a lot to be excited about. They like Darren Smith as well, got him from Central Connecticut, big-time scorer. Kind of feels a little bit like Tariq Francis at a lower level, was really productive. Can they make him a productive Big Ten player? They
love the NEC.
With Francis. We're going to spend the rest of the time on the Combine because that's what Andy's been doing this week. Here's a list of Big Ten players. 17 who played in the Big Ten last year. Trey Kaufman-Renn, Jacob Kofi were late adds here. You have 3 from the national champs, Michigan, 3 from Illinois. Again, the Combine is all this week here in Chicago, and Andy's been there. Let's start with the 3 players from the defending champs. And I got to be honest with you, it is weird to me that Yaxel Lendeborg isn't thought of more highly in NBA circles. I mean, he's a surefire first-round pick, but you see him kind of in the middle of the first round, maybe the top middle of the first round. What are you hearing about Yaxel? What's kind of the buzz on him?
Well, I do think he will be back end of the lottery, which now extends to 14. So, look, I think fit matters for him. And, I interviewed him yesterday again, and always a pleasure. But you know what's great about him is he appreciates this. And that's something I noticed yesterday is a lot of these players, now this is year 2 of having all this money in NIL, which is great, but the Combine isn't as big a deal, being an NBA guy, because they're already sort of being treated like professional. Not with Yaxel. Yaxel, as you have documented very well in his journey from, JC to UAB to Michigan, he really appreciates this. And I think he's going to come in, plug and play, ready to go, and work his tail off. And I think he's going to be an asset wherever he lands. So I think, he's right in that, sort of 10 to 20 range.
Just seeing what he did at the Final Four and how he played through injury, who would not want him on their team? And it goes back to the point that you're making about appreciating it, about a kid who was sitting in his bedroom playing video games a handful of years ago, and now he finds himself in the spotlight like this and loving what kind of has happened in his life and not being entitled to it. I just think it speaks volumes about the person he is. Man, I think whoever gets it, first of all, his skill set's off the charts. He looks like he was built in a lab, and he's a great kid.
I'm going to tell you one other little nugget that I saw yesterday. I was sitting next to Dusty May. On the other side was Yaxel. On the other side was assistant coach Mike Boynton. They were all watching Morez Johnson on the floor. And there's Yaxel, not doing his own thing because he didn't have to be down there, but he's cheering on his former teammate going through the Combine drills. That, to me, spoke volumes about who he is even now as he becomes a professional.
Well, let's talk about Morez because this is a really interesting decision that he has to make.
Yeah, I mean, we're in an era now where he could make more money. I mean, if he goes back to Michigan, then if he ends up being at the back part, of the first round or into the second. And yeah, he, I think, has maybe the toughest decision of anyone, not just in the Big Ten, because if he goes back to Michigan, they got a chance to win the national championship title again. He'll be featured more. If he stays in the draft, he's somewhere in that 15 to 20 range. So it's a tough call. Guy Mara, if I can just add here, I think he's moving up. I think people are seeing what we all saw during the course of the season. He's got that low base. I sat next to him yesterday. You see how big his legs are, even though his torso's thinner. But he alters shots, blocks shots. Such a command. He was telling me yesterday how much he looked up to the Gasol brothers and, as sort of mentors and players that he'd like to play like. And I think NBA teams are seeing that in him, that he can be such a factor inside. And when he gets the ball inside and spins on a player, that it's over.
He has such a great feel for the game,
yes.
too. He's an unbelievably good passer. So, 7'3", figures to be the first center off the board. Is that fair?
Yes. I mean, just think about his growth from where he came from UCLA to Michigan, his impact. And he did say, when I asked him what was your favorite game this year, he says, he didn't even hesitate, Arizona.
Well, a lot of people were doubting them before that game, and the doubting ended
he was great in that
rather
game.
Quickly. He was fabulous. That whole front line was incredible against a really big Arizona team. What about Illinois? Now, Keaton Waggler, every mock draft you see has him as the first Big Ten player off the board. It's an amazing journey to think of what we knew about Keaton Waggler a year ago, which for most people was essentially nothing. We certainly didn't even know how to pronounce his last name. And now that he's going to be the first Big Ten player off the board, it's a remarkable story.
Yeah, so if Yaxel is one about appreciating this, I think Waggler is 1A or 1B, whatever, in talking to him yesterday, because no way did he ever think this would be where he would be sitting a year ago as one of the featured lottery picks, at the NBA Draft Combine and lottery show and all that. He was telling me, basically in December when Brad Underwood and the staff made the move, he said Tyler Underwood came to him and said, we're going to have you on the ball. When they made that decision in December to change his position. And he said that first game, and I'm drawing a blank which game it was, but that first game, first couple possessions, he wasn't. And they had to remind him, no, we want you to be on the ball, the point guard. And ever since that point, it just took off. And of course, we talked about when I asked him what was his favorite game, Purdue. And, also around that game, not only did he score 46 at Mackey, but remember, that was the first game, if I'm not mistaken, Keaton Boswell did not play, or at least certainly they didn't have him for that game against Braden Smith. And he said there was a lot more pressure on me to deliver because of no Boswell, and he did with 46 at Mackey.
He had been playing well going into that, but that was when the whole country took notice of just how fabulous a player he is, and of course went on to be Big Ten Freshman of the Year. And it is remarkable, not just that he's going to be in the lottery, but when you think of how great the lottery is.
Yes.
I mean, the top of this draft is phenomenal. And here's a kid who was totally off the radar, who might be a top 5 pick. What about Andre Stojakovic? We were talking about Morez Johnson and that he has an interesting decision to make. Stojakovic is another one of those players who's at the combine, could come back. He's not seen necessarily as a first-round pick. What do you think the calculus is for him?
Yeah, I talked to him yesterday, and I do think it's interesting. I mean, he would like to be in the NBA. That's what he wants. Obviously, he's the son of a great NBA player in Peja Stojakovic. But I'm not feeling it. I'm not sensing from those that are there that he's a first-round pick. And I can't imagine with their family history and how they know the league that he would have the advice to be a second-round pick and stay, especially now in this new era in college basketball when he can go back to Illinois, compete for another national championship. I mean, he did tell me he's got 2 good options. Does he try to take the gamble or does he go back to Illinois where he's very, very, comfortable?
Needs to improve his outside shot. And
yes.
You would think that would be kind of the thing.
And he struggled yesterday at the combine shooting. I mean, we were watching him, and he was not making many threes.
Keaton Boswell, I think perimeter shooting is probably a little bit of a question mark for him too, but you can't, much like Stojakovic, you can't question the toughness, the physicality, all of those types of things. Boswell doesn't have the option of coming back. How do NBA people see him?
You know, I don't think he's as big as like a Jamal Shed, who played well for the Raptors this season, came from Houston. But I could see him being that kind of guy that basically has a different path to get there, but finds a way because he's such a good defender and he can be a good playmaker, a good leader. So, you know, I could see him finding a way in. He may not get drafted, but, you know, getting on a roster at some point, maybe a two-way through the G League.
Really good wingspan and, again, physicality and toughness and defensive acumen.